Okay, we'll get started. And first, before we go on, any questions about the second coursework, which is the deadline, and we don't have lectures or lab next week? After? Okay, after. So that's more longer time questions, yeah. Okay, and so we started the PWA last week, and we create a registered service worker and use it to cache the files. So just to fresh up memory, so that's the website we'll be looking at, going through. So that's the website, and if we look at the code itself, so we'd have most the same as before. So we have this special file. So the app.js will be your normal JavaScript code, and then the only thing there, which is for service worker, is this part. So registering a service worker. So you first and check if it's available from Navigator. If it is, and then you register, and then it tells it which file it should be. So in this case, which is called sw.js, which is this part. So this is all the code for service worker. We explained service worker run in a separate thread, so it does not block the main and browsing of the website or interaction with the website. And in that, the main thing is this list called app shell files. And it's not particularly smart. All it does is just say, made a list of the files that you want to cache. That basically means when you first load the page or go to the website or the app, it will download all these files and store them in your local cache, the browser cache. Then these don't need to be downloaded again, second time. Nothing particularly smart about it. So all you need to do is create a list. Of course, for your website, the list will be different. So there still will be some pictures and some HTML files and some JavaScript files and style CSS as well. So in this case, it has some font files, which you might not have, etc. Okay, and then, so this is where we stopped last week. So we said we're gonna install the service worker, and we saw in the app there's a line we'll do the register, and then you install, and install after installation. Okay, so caches, that is the collections of caches on your local computer. So you can have more than one cache. Even for the same website, you can have multiple ones. And you open the ones you want to create. This is when you first install. And so the cache name is here. It has a particular name, in this case called the JS13K PWA version 1. And so then you do this because almost all the actions with service workers is asynchronized. So you use then, which returns a promise. Okay, so, and this line is just console log, which send a message, say I'm gonna caching something. And this is actually where the actual caching happens. Okay, so this cache will be passed on from the caches, because when you do caches open a certain name that give you the actual cache object from the browser, which is returned here. Then you can say cache.add all. That means cache everything from content to cache. So the content to cache basically is just this list of the files you created, and plus something else called games image. So games image again is just a list of images, and every time they change from data image / some name.jpg. Okay, so the most important line is really just this, and it will add everything in this list into the cache, and then it will return at the end of this execution, it will give some message, even if it's successful or some error or some error message, and that's why this is the return here. Okay, so this is where we stopped last week. Excuse me. So now we keep going. So the first thing is, so once you cache these files, so you don't want the app to download these files again from the server, remote server. So to do that, you need to intercept any request to retrieve files, and then instead of going to the server, you go to the local cache. Does that make sense? So if you remember this picture from last week, this one. And so now, the application is your app. Any request from the application will go through service worker first. And then service worker will decide, okay, if we will need an image file that's already in the cache, then it doesn't go to network, but instead of going to the cache. And if it's not available from the local cache, it will go to network and get lost back. And same to the application, but also add files to the cache as well. So now we're going to look at the service worker part. How do you detect that there is a request to retrieve something, and how do you check if it's available from the cache? So this is the example. And so all you need to do is just says you need to add event listener, and this time you listen to fetch request. Okay, and here the fetch is a little bit different from the fetch we are using, say, to talk to the the REST API, and similar meanings but not exactly the same. So that particular fetch is the replacement for the XML HTTP request. And this is for anything that you need to retrieve data from the server is covered here. So even it's not talking to a REST API, just say I need say a picture or a new HTML file for my next page, will be also covered here. Okay, and in this example, it just says console log, and so it just tells you, say, the service worker detected there is an attempt to retrieve something from the server. And obviously, in the actual code, you want to replace this line to the code to say, I want to check if the file exists in the cache, and if it is, I'll return the file from the cache, etc., etc. So that's what we're going to look at next. Okay. So this is a little bit long, so I'm going to go through slowly. But the general idea is exactly this, as I said before. So once the service worker catches the fetch request on the event, so it goes to the cache to check if the file exists. If it already there, then it will return the file from the cache to the application, and the request finished. And if it does not exist, it will go to the network, retrieve the actual file, and return that to the application, but also save the new file into the cache. Okay, so that's quite a few things there. That's why the few lines of code. Okay, and so this part is the same. And so you had event listener, you listen to fetch request or event. Okay, and then if that happens, you respond with this. Okay, so you try to say caches dot match dot e dot request. Okay, so I think we mentioned this before, and that refers to all the caches you available in your local browser. So you have multiple of these, and the E will be the event. So that basically is this fetch event, and it tries to see if the request of the fetch request, the fetch event. So obviously the fetch would have some messages to say this is the file I want, etc. And if that matches, so exists in one of the existing caches, then you do the following. Again, so, and because everything here is asynchronous, it's a promise, so you use then. Instead of just say if and then, you can't do that. Okay, again, so this line, again, it's just sending a message, just tell the users the fetch is now working, or the service work is now doing something. It can return either R, so this will happen, so, okay, so basically there are two possibilities. Either they find a match, or they don't find a match. And then they always will return a response, which is called R here. Okay, so in terms of return, you either return R. So basically, if you find, say, actually need the picture, to return the picture itself, then the R itself will be not empty, and just return this. Okay, in the case where it does not find a match, then the R will be empty. Then this condition will be false, and then it will check the next part. The next part is actually to get the pictures or any other files from the server or internet. Okay, it's actually, so it's doing a fetch now. So this fetch is actually the fetch we're using to talk to the REST API and other. Okay, again, so in terms the request itself and just e.request, and this comes from this fetch event. Okay, then this will be the responses. Then the way this work is very similar to how do we do fetch to talk to the REST API. It's the same. So assume that means you get a response, then it will do something with the response, and again using the promise, which is asynchronous. These are only done after you get the response. Does that make sense so far? It's getting a bit complicated. So again, so this is just say making the code more compact but less readable. And so it returns either the match from the local cache, which will be the R, or return the results from actually fetch from the server. Okay. So this will be, remember, will be the response we get from the server. Could be, say, a JSON array, could be a picture, could be an HTML file. Okay, it will return something. Again, the return itself is not quite critical. It's this line of code actually useful. So it says cache and dot opens cache name. So this is actually something we done before when we first started the app to cache everything. You need to do this from last week's lecture, I think. Or maybe just look at the code. I think it's still, hopefully still there, yeah. So you have to do, if you remember, this is when we do installing the service worker, and you need to first open the cache, and then you add things to the cache. So it's quite similar to this part. So now what we're doing is we try to open the cache first, and we put this request. So that tells you basically what the things is needed, and the response into the cache. Does that make sense? So this line adds the new file into the cache, and essentially this is the URL to the files you needed. For example, if you need a picture, and what it receives will be something looks like this. Something like this. So that's what the request might look like. It will tell us the fetch, say, this is the file I want to get. And then this will be saved together with the actual response from the server, which is what this response.clone does. Basically make a copy of the clone. The response itself is the picture itself. So you store this pair of the kind of URL to pointing to the resource and the actual resource itself. and add them into the cache. Hopefully that makes sense. So the request will be always a URL, and this response can be a picture, it's always a file. So and it can be a picture, can be a CSS file, can be HTML or JavaScript file. That's all. And then at the end, it returns the response. So this will be the response you receive from the server. Now you can return to the application who had made the initial request. So it will receive whatever file it requested. Is this okay? So that's the. This is probably the most important part. So this is actually how the cache actually can be useful. Okay. Yeah, and so I think we go through all these in the explanation already, so I'm not gonna go through them again. Okay. So the next thing is about update. So obviously, for example, the website would update. For example, they would change the logos, change the pictures for the game, or even update the main page. And then your local cache needs to be updated to match the latest version. And the way this work is fairly kind of straightforward or naive in a sense. So if you remember this, and which is the name we given to the cache, so we call the JS13K-PWA-V1. So once this name changed, this old cache will be removed and replaced with a new cache. That's all it is. Okay, so what here says, okay, for example, if the code, so basically this part will be part of the service worker code, so it will be here, right? That will be this line. And when you need to say update the cache, and the first thing is to change the cache name here in this file. So once the client side and get the new version of this service worker JavaScript file, it will detect that the cache name changed, and it will try to redo or re-download everything. And then the download everything, the process is still the same. It says caches.open. Now it has a different name. So that's the new name, come from the service.js file. And then just say cache.attall content to cache. That's the same. So basically, once the browser detects a change in the cache name, and it will re-download everything. So it's not particularly smart in the sense, for example, if only 2 files changed and the version changed, you still have to download everything, even the files that has not been updated. Okay. In the sense, there is some smartness in this service worker. For example, it will keep the old one, version 1, until, say, there's no, say, instance or app using it anymore before it's removed. Is that okay so far? Okay. Yeah. Okay, and so another thing related is about clearing the cache. That means when you don't need the cache anymore. So obviously, you already know you can just do that manually in the browser. You can go to developer tools and then clear the cache. Do you know how to do that, or how to clear cache manually in the browser? Yes, no. So it's part of the developer tools. And if you go to the cache section, so currently it has nothing in it. Which should. Oh, I'm surprised. This actually should down the cache. Oh. I see. So I have to go to this page, and oh, there's some errors. But if you go to applications and go to the cache, and you can see, okay, these are the caches created by this website, and you can just right click and say delete and we'll remove that. So that's how you do it manually in the browser. But you can also do that in the code, which is a bit different. So what you need is a oops. You listen on this active event. So what that is, and it goes through the list of caches currently available. So it might just be one, or could be more than one, and it check. So if the key in the current list, so the key here is, so basically that's an array, caches.keys. So that gives you the list of names of the caches that you stored in your local cache. So, and this could be named like JS13K PW-V1, V2, or some other caches. And if the key does not equal to the cache name, so remember this cache name is this one here, which tells the browser what cache this app needs. So that says if the key does not match anymore, you just delete that cache. Does that make sense? So the actual JavaScript code, if you want to delete cache, is very simple. You just say cache dot delete followed by the name of the cache. That's all it is. And this line of code, it's automatically check all the available cache and remove anything that is no longer needed. Slightly more complicated. Okay, so that's everything I'm going to cover about service worker. So the next part is about making PWA installable. So that says, for example, when you first open the website, there was a prompt, a message say, do you want to install the app? And if you click yes, it will add icon to your home screen. So just as say a mobile native app would behave look like. So and these are the requirements that to make your PWA installable. So it does not necessarily say having a service worker does not make your app installable or PWA installable. So first you need a web manifest file. So this is just a text file, like a configuration file. So you have to write some code or settings in it. That's it, and it's not difficult. And the next one is say the website itself have to be served from HTTPS, which we covered before. And same for if you want to have the service working, you have to have a HTTPS server. So the same here. If you want to make your app installable, you need the HTTPS server, and you need the icon. So basically, when you add to the home screen, that should show a picture of what the app is. So this is a picture, just very simple. And finally, you need to have a service worker. So part of the code would have to register service worker. And so really, and we already covered this one. We talked about, for example, how to use GitHub Pages to host your code with HTTPS server. And we also covered this part so far. So how do you create, register, install, clear, update service worker. And this part is trivial. Really just saying you need to have a picture, which is the icon for your app. And so going to mostly focus on this part is the manifest file. So what need to put in there. Okay, So first, so the manifest file is another file. You need to link to your main index HTML file, something like you would link a CSS or JavaScript file. So you say link and relationship, and in the CSS file, this would called style sheet, and here you call manifest, and then you say HIF, which is the hyperreference, which is actually the URL to the file. Here it just put the name of the file, which is js13kpwa.web manifest. So it has a unique extension called the web manifest. So instead of say .js or .css, and that's the file name. Okay, so that's all it is. So you add, if we look at the actual code, so if you look at index, yeah, so it's just this line here. So you have, say, this line for the CSS, and this line is for manifest, and you have some other lines to load, say, JavaScript file, which is using script tag, which is a little bit different. Okay. Okay, now we're going to have a look at actually what is inside this manifest file. So, okay, I think it's probably easier to look at here in the code editor. So that's the file, js13kpwa.webmanifest. So you have these things, and some of them are compulsory. That means you have to have it. And for example, you have to have the name. So that's just the name with displays. And the short name is optional. Description is optional. Basically, these are providing a bit more information. Icon is compulsory in the sense you need at least one icon. And in this case, and it provides many different icons, is because it's to fit when you need different sizes of these icons. So this is 32 by 32 pixel, which is smaller size, so that's 64, 96, etc., etc. So for your web app or PWA, you need at least one of certain size. Okay, and also these things are useful. I'm gonna probably cover briefly later on as well. So you need to tell it and what is the page or what is the main page to start with. In this case, it says index.html. And then, okay, so this is to run the app in full screen mode. So if you don't have it, the app would run a browser, so as to see borders, etc. But if you say full screen mode and you don't see any browser buttons, make it looks more like an actual native app. Okay, the theme color and the background color and is for the app itself. More particularly, the theme color is for the splash screen. So this is, say, when the app starts, it usually shows a background with the titles and some icons, and this sets the color of that background. I'm gonna see that probably see a demo very soon. Okay. Yeah, so already explained all these things. It tells you which one, say for example, name is required and short name is recommended. That means it's not compulsory, it's good to have. Icons, you need at least one, and etc. We explained all these already. Okay, so once you have all these things, so basically you had matched all these 4 requirements, and then your apps will be installable. And when you open it on a mobile device, it should tell you an option to say, do you want to add the app to home screen? Okay, and so this is what it's going to look like on using the Firefox browser on mobile devices. So if you use different browser, it looks slightly different. So okay, and this is what it looks like. So you have the icon there, so that's installed on your home screen, and you have this little thing, kind of icon inside icon to indicate that's a PWA, not actual native app. Okay, and then this is a splash screen. The color is set by the same color in the settings, if you remember. So that's what this color sets. The splash screen. Okay. So I'm gonna try to run this on my phone so you can see what it looks like. So I need to first connect the phone to my laptop, and then I'll map the screen, and you can see what it looks like. Okay, first let me see if I can get that to screen mapping to work. Okay, let me get this connected. Oh, it's not working. Um, hmm. Uh, how could that be? Huh. Hmm. Not working. Uh. Hmm. So I connected the phone to the laptop, but obviously somehow it's not allow you to connect for some reason. Okay, I'll try to restart the phone. If it doesn't work, I'll try the wireless version. It was working last time I tried.
You have to go and find back.
No, no. So it should automatically show the phone if it's working properly. Hmm. Nope, it just does not even recognize there's something connected. Okay, let me try see if I can use the other one. Setting Wi-Fi. Okay, so obviously this one doesn't work. So I'm gonna do the other way. Okay, let me see if this works. 178.48. Okay, at least this seems to be connected. Summary toolbox, clipboard app. How do I, is it here? No. File. Huh, where is, okay, so this is actually, so I managed to, so you can see this is my, actually, my phone now, it's mapped, okay? Okay, so next time I have to use this one. So what you need to do, I'm going to open that same website and on my phone, so you can see the prompt you to add to home screen and what it looks like after you actually install it and add it to home screen. So first I need to get the URL, which would be in here. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see clearly. And by default, this one is using a browser called Brave. Anyone heard of Brave? No. So this one, when I try to open the PWA, it works and you can display, you can look at what it looks like, but it doesn't prompt you to do anything in terms of installation. So if I just copy the same URL and I open my Chrome, oops, already there. Let me try again. Okay, and it might be a bit difficult to see, but at the bottom, it has a prompt. Says add this app to home screen. Can you see that one? So if you click that one, okay, and it asks you to confirm, do you want to add this one? And you click add. Okay, it says adding, etc., etc. And then we go back and on your home screen, and you should see that icon there, right? And can you see that's the new icon, which is D1? And if you click that one, and you have this and splash screen very quickly, and then the actual app itself, yeah. So make it almost looks like or works like a native app. Even say everything is really just a web app, which you can already. Oops. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So that's that. I think that's enough. Okay. Don't need this one anymore. Okay, and so how much time do we have? Okay, we roughly about on time. And the other thing you can do with PWA is to send notifications. So and notification is like the better version of alert. So you all have an alert. You have a box pop up in the middle of the screen on top roughly here to say a message. So notification is slightly better version of that. And so what you need to do, or what we have in the example, is first to request permission to send notifications. I think this is quite common now. So almost every website you go visit, it will actually to request you do you want to receive notification from this website? And you either choose allow or block. Most people would just choose block. And so what this code does here is says when user click this button, and request dummy notification, and it will request permission first before actually and sending you notification every 30 seconds. Okay, and so the code here says, and you have this button, and which is linked to this button with this ID in the code. And if you want to, you can have a look at actual an index HTML file. There's only one button here, and that's ID is called notifications. So that's the request my dummy notifications button. And you say add event listener, you listen to click. So all these done can be using VON, which is slightly faster. And you says notification dot request permission. So and then, so that basically means if this user say this one would pop up the window and say I want to send you notifications, allow or block. And if it's correct or successful, and you will say if result equal to granted, you do this thing, which creates random notifications, which is not particularly useful, but demonstrate how the notification work. Does that make sense? So the only thing new here is it really just says notification dot request permission. Everything else we have seen before, that just says you click the button, it will run this code. Okay, and so if you run the mobile phone, it should something like this, and say would ask you, do you like to? Again, this is the interface for Firefox. Other browsers may be slightly different. I think if I do it here, doesn't even work. Okay. No. So if I open it in a different browser, I maybe already choose to block it or okay. And so that's the notification. So you click and it asks for your permission, and you can choose say allow. If you don't allow, then it doesn't show any notification. Come on. Still not showing anything. Yeah, it's fetching something, but not showing the notification somehow. Okay, as you can see, every time I click the button, the service worker is actually fetching something. What it does is actually pick a random game from the list and show it as a notification. But somehow the notification itself is not shown. Do I have Firefox? No. Okay, maybe just let's have a look at the code itself. So we're seeing this part, and on the Windows or the on desktop, slightly different, and choose whether to accept or not. And so this is really so how do you create a notification? And so you need to set a few things, and over here it just says pick a random number and pick the game, and save the author the picture into the an option object. Oops. And then this option object will be used to create the notification. So you have this notification title, which is defined here, which is the name properties of random picked games out of games array. And we have this options project object, and it says the body, which is the text of the message you're putting inside the notification, which is the here. And it says created by the author. So that's the same game and .author property. And you can have an image as well. So you have the icon, which is notif image, which is this thing. So that's the picture of that particularly for that game. It should work, but obviously I don't know why it doesn't work here. So all it does is actually you set a timeout. That means every 30,000 milliseconds, which is 30 seconds, and it will run random notification function, which is basically this function. Okay, every time you run, it will pick a random game and create a notification. Okay, so that's why if you look at here, so if I clear these, every 30 seconds, and you can see there's a message from service worker, which is retrieving from the cache, and the game and title and author and picture. If I click here, so that means it's starting to pick a game. And if we wait 30 seconds, okay, yeah, it try to pick again. But there should be a message here on the page. I don't know why it doesn't show here. Let's try again. Random. No, I just decided not going to show the. The same? Yeah, it doesn't work. Okay, so that part of the demo doesn't quite work. Okay, so this comes to the last part of this lecture, is talk about progressive loading. And so the general idea is, say, if you have a fairly large page or fairly long or tall page like this one, and it might take a while to load everything onto the page. And it is very important to show user the first meaningful paint. So that basically means what you can see in the first kind of view of the page. In here, user only really just see the information about two games. So it will be much faster from the user's perspective if the web page just retrieves the information about the first two games and then display without loading any of the games below. So it will be by default the browser would load everything. So load all the HTML, CSS, and all the pictures of all these games before it shows the first screen. So now we try to show the first screen faster by only loading these two games. Does that make sense? So that's what progressive loading is. And as user scrolls down, and more picture will be loaded. Okay, so the reason why this is important is says the loading time of a page is very important, and the people might abandon your website completely if it takes a long time to load. So that's what this picture curve shows. And so the x-axis shows the number of seconds for your page to appear, and the y-axis shows the percentage of users abandon the website if it takes this long to load. And so what it says is, for example, here, and it's a bit difficult to see, but this line, it says 25%. That means about a quarter of user will abandon your website if the page takes 4 seconds to load. Okay, so this is a 4 on the axis. So that's 4 seconds is way too long for most people. And for example, if it takes, let's say, 8 seconds to load, then maybe here, maybe 35, 40% of people would abandon your website. Obviously, that is something you want to completely avoid. For example, you want to sell people something or get them to sign up, and you don't want people to say, not even wait for the first page to load and then leave. And that's very important to make sure your page load very quickly. So for example, on Google, Facebook, all the big ones, they try to say load the first paint in less than half a second. And it's actually quite difficult because there's lots of communication back and forwards between your browser and the server. Sometimes maybe up and maybe third-party website as well. Okay. So the techniques we're gonna cover here is called progressive loading, or sometimes even called lazy loading. And what it does is just basically says only load the things that will be displayed and don't load everything else until, for example, only load these pictures as you scroll down the page. Okay, and so there's certain things you can do, and something quite easy is just to use this defer keyword. So what it is tells the browser to say, don't load this file, and load this file after you already display the page. So if you know this file is not necessarily to show the page, for example, maybe this one is about interaction user can do on the page, then you know it's not going to be useful until the page is fully loaded. Otherwise, it's not possible to interact or click any buttons, for example. And so you can just use defer. Then the browser would load the files needed to show the page, and only after the page is showed, you will load this app.js file. And you can apply this to, say, CSS, JavaScript, pictures, other things. Okay, and then the other way is to split CSS file to different media types. Okay, so this is how we done so far, the normal way, and by default, the browser would use this CSS file to display the page on a screen or on a mobile device. But sometimes you might have special CSS files, which actually is for example, only useful for printing. So for example, if I want to print this page, it will not look exactly as, for example, if I printing, oh, it's close enough. If I want to printing this page, this is what it looks like. It applies a different CSS. And what you can do is you can say media equal to print to tell the browser, say, this CSS file is only useful when I will try to print the page. And then the browser will not load this CSS file if it doesn't need to print anything. So it will wait until the user actually wants to print, which load this. Okay. Okay, and so the next thing is about images. So images usually is much larger than the CSS or HTML files you can have. And one way to make user feel it's faster to load large images is to use a placeholder image. So that's not the actual image, but it will cover the space that the real image will go to with something much simpler and faster load, and only show the real image when it's fully loaded. But from the user perspective, they already see something, even that's not the actual image, and it will change when the real image becomes available. So the effects on this website is actually when you first load, for each of these pictures, it's actually put a placeholder image, something like this, and then it will replace to the real image, and when that becomes available. But because the how do I say the display is very quick, so you probably don't see this for very long, or may not even notice it. So for example, if you look very carefully, if I refresh the page now, you see kind of gray and then kind of a blur effects, and then show the real picture. Maybe if I clear the cache, maybe can force it to be a bit faster, a bit slower. I mean, I don't know how to actually slow down to make it more obvious. And so at least I can do is I can delete the cache, so you can't load from locally. It has to load them. So if I refresh again, still in no time. But if you pay attention carefully, is you have this kind of grazing and the kind of blurred, and it becomes the proper picture and becomes sharper. Okay. So the way to do this, and initially, all the pictures on the page is done using this picture. So that's the placeholder image. And so uh, if you look at the template file, it will generate. Okay, so maybe I can. So if you look at this line, and if you remember from last week, this is the old pure JavaScript code, which to generate, say, kind of one article for each of the games. And you can see the image they put in there, and the actual picture is the placeholder.png. They will put there, but the actual file name is actually here, and the slug will be later replaced with the game name, and you can see this name, sorry, this picture, placeholder.png, that's inside image. Sorry, it's inside the data, image, and placeholder. Ah, it does not display it. Okay, so I have to go here. Say it's image. Okay, I'm not sure how readable this is. Maybe quite small, but that's what the placeholder image look like. And when it was, when each of the file first, and sorry, each of the picture first added to the HTML file. Let me go back to here. Okay, so that's this part, and so all the picture is actually just loading a placeholder. And if we go back to the and the next what it does, and it replace using JavaScript to replace this source to the actual image using JavaScript. So this is and what it does here. Okay, and so first it does this. Do you still remember? So it's a one. So we use a lot. Is say document.getElement by ID something something. That's used a lot. And there's a different way to select elements from page. This case it says query select all image with data source. So it's selecting all the image elements with a data source property from the page. So what this gives you is an array of image objects from your page. So this is stored in here. So this is an array of images to load, is an array of the image object. Okay, and what it says image dot set attributes equal, and then it says set the source of the image to image dot get attributes data source. Okay, so what it does is says it set the source property of the image to the value of the data source. So essentially what it does is change the source to the URL or the file, or the actual picture file. That's all it is. Does this make sense? So you set it so it goes through this array, that's the image, and you set the property, which is the source, you change that to the data source. And then this line is to remove the data source attributes. Because once you show the actual picture, you don't need to the data source attributes anymore, because the picture URL is now already saved in the source attribute. You could keep the data source, but it's not necessary. It says after the picture is loaded, you remove attributes date source. Okay. Okay. So and lastly, and this line of code, and it says images to load. That's this one here, which is all the pictures on your website with a data source property or attributes. And then for each of these pictures, you run load images with that picture as a parameter. So this is the load images. And for that particular picture, it will change the source value, source attribute of the picture, and then remove the data source attribute. Yeah. Is this the okay? And if you remember, there's a a little bit blur effect, and when you first see the picture, so if you look at here, if you refresh, okay, somehow you see the gray, and then the picture and becomes a little bit blur and more sharp. So the blur part and the changing from blur to sharp is done just with CSS. There's no JavaScript code involved. So what it did is it first used this line, and it says for any pictures with a data source attribute, I want to have a blur, and I think this is the radius of the blur is 0.2 em, so it's slightly spread out and from the actual picture. That's all it is. So that gives you this look. So the PNG itself looks blurred, not sharp. And the second one is says for all the images, I want to blur equal to 0 em. That basically just means no blur. And I want that to last 0.5 seconds. That's all. So that's why you see the picture, it's blur, and then becomes clear in 0.5 seconds. And you can change it. I can't change it here because it's hosted online, but you can make it longer so that maybe the blur transition is more obvious. But usually you don't want people to notice this too much. Okay, now comes the last part about loading on demand. And so the loading on demand is some way. For example, you only load these 3 pictures now, and only as you scroll more, and these pictures get loaded later. Actually, you can, if you look carefully, you can see that one. You only scroll down, you had the blur and etc., and then become okay. So this way, then you don't have to load everything, and almost use if you don't look at here, they will not notice it's just being loaded, and for it, it's like everything is already displayed. Okay, and so to do this, and you need something called intersection observer API, which is basically will to tell you which part of the page is currently in the browser window. So basically means visible, and then you can use that information to load the picture. Okay, I'm gonna go through this code again quite slowly, and this line you'll be familiar with now is basically just to test if the browser supports this API. So that's quite new. And say if this intersection observer API is available, then this one will be true. Otherwise, it will be false, and it will just go do this, which we already seen before. And this is, if you remember, this function images to load, which is oops, this function here. So just replace all the pictures. Sorry, the source property of the image object to the actual pictures. So that's basically, if this one doesn't work, you just load the actual pictures, but at least you still have this, like, say, placeholder and animation of the zoom, so it's blurry, etc. Okay, so if this actually exists, and then you create a new instance of this intersection observer, and then you have the items, which is in this case the things you want to test if it's already inside the visible part, and the observer, so that's observer from this intersection observer. Okay, so here we have the items, which is the list of the things. So in our case, will be the list of the pictures, or the list of the image object, the IMG elements from the page, which is items here. It says for each item, and you say item dot is intersecting. That's all it is. It will give you either true or false value. So if that particular picture is visible, and this say is intersecting will be true. And so the reason it's called intersecting, it just says the picture itself is like a rectangle, and the browser windows is like another rectangle. If these two rectangles intersect, that means part of the picture is visible. So that's why it's called intersecting. So it does an load image item.target. Okay, and so the item.target just say give you the reference to the image object on the page, and this load images. Do you remember that? That's the one we created a little bit earlier. Just this function. It's like the same. Just replace the source attributes in the image object to the actual source. So what it does here is, if the items is available, then you load the actual picture. That's all it is. And then this line, you remove that particular picture from the list of items you monitoring. So for example, these items will start with all the pictures on your page. But once a picture is displayed, maybe picture 1, and this picture, let's say, and this picture is displayed, then you can remove that from the observer list, because you don't have to monitor whether it intersects of the page anymore, because it's already displayed fully. So that's what this does. So you unobserve the item.target, which is actual the IMG elements from the page. That's all it is. Okay. So this line here is actually adding all the pictures that observer should monitor. So it says images to load, and again from a few slides back, that would be this one. If you remember, and the images to load is all the images with data source properties on the page, right? So that's the list. For each of these pictures, you add the picture to the observer. So the observer, you observe that particular image, and you repeat for. So basically, that just adds to the list of the things that observer would check or monitor, and you need to do this part. Okay, and then once this done, and then the browser would constantly monitor this list of scenes, pictures, and decide when to actually load the full picture and then remove them from the observer list. Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, and that's everything. Yeah. So these are some links, and which goes to the online tutorial, which covers exactly what we covered in the lecture today. So you can have a look if you need want to know more of those.